Woman goes into labor and the doctors are stunned when she gives birth to 10 babies at once. Would she be okay, though? To find out, please watch the video to the end. But first, subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so as to not miss stories like this. The Anderson family dinner was always a spectacle, a mix of warm camaraderie and absolute chaos. Jenna Anderson sat at the head of the table, her hands resting protectively over her swollen belly. At 7 months pregnant, she was glowing, though the sheer size of her bump had become a point of amusement for her sprawling family. Tonight, her husband's extended clan had packed into their modest home to celebrate Uncle Leroy's retirement. "Leroy, you sure you're retiring? You've been saying that for 10 years now," boomed James, Jenna's husband, from across the room. He was a man who could command attention even in the midst of the Anderson uproar, his easy laugh filling every corner of the room. "Hey, I mean it this time," Leroy retorted, raising his beer in a mock toast. The kids, no fewer than 14 between Jenna's side and James's siblings, were running circles around the living room, darting between relatives and a precariously placed cake on the coffee table. Jenna tried to stifle a laugh as her sister-in-law, Cheryl, screeched when a soccer ball narrowly missed her perfectly coiffed hair. "James, control your kids," Cheryl snapped, though her glare softened quickly as one of the younger nieces tugged on her skirt with an apologetic smile. Cheryl had always been the diva of the family, arriving tonight in stilettos that had no business stepping onto Jenna's slightly muddy lawn. As Jenna reached for her water, her mother-in-law, Marge, swooped in like a hawk. "You should be eating more, Jenna," she said, plopping an extra helping of mashed potatoes onto her plate. "You're eating for two." "Two?" Jenna echoed with a wry smile. "Feels more like 12. The comment drew laughter from the table, though, deep down, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that her pregnancy wasn't entirely typical. At her last appointment, the doctor had hinted that her hormone levels were unusually high. But with so much going on, she hadn't dwelled on it. Not yet. Amid the clinking of glasses and overlapping conversations, Jenna suddenly winced. It was a subtle but sharp pang in her side. She gripped the edge of the table, her breath hitching. "Jenna, you okay?" James asked, his brows knitting in concern as he noticed her blanching. Yeah, she waved him off, forcing a smile. "Just baby gymnastics, I think." But Marge was already on high alert. "Are you sure, dear? You don't look so good." "Mom, relax. She's fine," James said, though his hand never left Jenna's arm. The tension lingered briefly before being swallowed back into the dinner's lively energy. As the evening wore on, the family began dispersing in their usual fashion, slowly and noisily. Cheryl declared she wouldn't leave without a slice of cake, even as her husband grumbled about the long drive home. Uncle Leroy was showing the kids magic tricks by the fireplace, his booming laugh echoing as he fumbled a card trick for the 4th time. Jenna, however, was unusually quiet. She sat in the corner of the couch, her hands resting over her belly again. A dull ache had settled low in her abdomen, and no amount of repositioning seemed to ease it. "James," she whispered when he came over to refill her water, "I think something's wrong." He froze, water pitcher in hand. "Wrong how?" "I don't know. I just feel off. Can you call the doctor?" The color drained from his face. Okay, let's get you to the hospital, just to be safe." By the time James managed to herd Jenna into the car, fending off questions and worried looks from nearly every family member, they were speeding down the highway toward Memorial General. Jenna's breathing was shallow, her hands clenched into fists on her lap. "Do you think it's too early?" she asked, her voice tinged with panic. "I'm only 7 months." James reached over to squeeze her hand, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. "It's going to be fine. We're just being cautious. You'll be fine." But neither of them truly believed it. When they arrived at the hospital, Jenna was immediately ushered into the maternity ward. The nurses worked efficiently, hooking her up to monitors and checking her vitals. The rhythmic beeping of the fetal heart monitor filled the room, but the concerned glances exchanged between the staff didn't go unnoticed. "Mrs. Anderson," said Dr. Patel, a composed woman with kind eyes. "Your contractions are irregular, but we need to run some additional tests. Your blood pressure is a bit higher than we'd like, and I want to make sure the baby, or babies, are doing okay." "Babies?" Jenna's eyes widened. You mean twins? Dr. Patel hesitated, glancing at the nurse. Let's get the ultrasound set up. James paced the room like a caged animal as the ultrasound machine was wheeled in. Jenna bit her lip, the ache in her abdomen intensifying. The technician spread cool gel over her stomach and began the scan, her face carefully neutral as she moved the wand over Jenna's belly. And then, the room fell silent. What is it? James demanded, his voice rising. Is something wrong? Dr. Patel leaned closer to the screen, her brow furrowing. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, she began slowly. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. Jenna's heart was in her throat. What? What is it? Dr. Patel turned the screen toward them, pointing at a cluster of tiny moving forms. You're not just having twins, you're having 10 babies. The room spun. Jenna stared at the screen, her mind racing. 10? That couldn't be possible. She clutched James's arm as he staggered back into the nearest chair, his face ashen. How is that even? Jenna's voice faltered, overwhelmed by the tidal wave of emotions crashing over her. We'll have to act fast, Dr. Patel said, snapping into a brisk, no-nonsense tone. This is an extremely high-risk pregnancy. We need to monitor you closely, and delivery might need to happen sooner than we anticipated. James finally found his voice. What does this mean for Jenna? And the babies? Are they going to be okay? Dr. Patel hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. We'll do everything in our power to ensure the best outcome for everyone. But it's going to be a long road. Jenna swallowed hard, her grip on James's hand tightening. The gravity of the situation was sinking in, and for the first time, real fear gripped her chest. How was she going to carry 10 babies? How was she going to deliver them safely? But as the minutes ticked by, a steely resolve began to take shape beneath her fear. If her body was strong enough to create 10 lives, then she'd fight with everything she had to bring them into the world safely. She had to. The news of Jenna's pregnancy, and not just any pregnancy, but the 10 babies, spread through the Anderson family like wildfire. It started with a teary phone call to Marge, who promptly fainted before recovering just long enough to yell into the phone, "Did you say that 10?" By the next morning, every member of the extended Anderson clan seemed to know, from Great Aunt Ethel in Minnesota to Cousin Lyle, who was on a backpacking trip in Peru. By noon, their house was a hub of activity. The family descended en masse, bringing casseroles, baby name suggestions, and enough unsolicited advice to last a lifetime. You'll need a whole soccer team's worth of diapers, Cheryl declared, dramatically placing herself at the kitchen table. I'll be the godmother of at least 2, by the way. You can't deny me that after everything I've done for you. Cheryl, you forgot her birthday last year, James muttered, earning a sharp glare. Meanwhile, Marge was directing an impromptu baby shower committee in Jenna's living room. We need to start planning now. We'll need 10 cribs, 10 car seats, and oh my goodness, what about the baptism? We'll need extra priests. Marge? James groaned, rubbing his temples. Can we deal with one thing at a time, like, I don't know, keeping Jenna calm? Calm? Marge threw her hands up. How is she supposed to stay calm when she's carrying an entire basketball team? She's practically a miracle. Mom, Jenna interrupted gently, her voice filled with a mix of exhaustion and amusement. I appreciate the enthusiasm, but I think I need a nap more than a shopping list right now. The house quieted for all of 2 seconds before James's younger brother, Tony, burst through the door, carrying an enormous stuffed giraffe that barely fit through the frame. I saw this in the store and thought, perfect for baby number 7. You're already numbering them? James asked, exasperated. Of course, Tony said, plopping the giraffe in the middle of the room. I call dibs on being the fun uncle. I'll teach them how to skateboard, maybe get them into dirt biking. Tony, they're not even born yet, Cheryl scoffed. And let's be honest, you still live with Mom. Maybe don't offer parenting lessons. Don't ruin this for me, Cheryl, Tony shot back, grabbing a cookie from the table. The kids in the family weren't far behind in the chaos. Jenna's niece, 8-year-old Gracie, tugged on her dress. Aunt Jenna, can I name one of the babies? How about Sparkle or Glitter? Or Rainbow? Before Jenna could respond, her nephew Ethan chimed in. No way, Gracie. Those are terrible names. They should have cool names like Thor or Wolverine. Jenna chuckled, rubbing her belly. How about we wait until they're here before we pick names? They might have their own ideas. Gracie frowned. Babies don't talk, Aunt Jenna. Ethan snorted. Yeah, Gracie. Everyone knows that. The older members of the family weren't any less excitable. Uncle Leroy, who had barely recovered from his retirement party, showed up with a notepad full of business ideas to help the family financially prepare. Hear me out, he said, tapping the table for emphasis. A reality show. 10 Little Miracles. Cameras in the house 24/7. We'll make a fortune. James groaned. Leroy, we're not turning our lives into a circus. But Leroy wasn't done. Or a sponsorship deal with a diaper company. Think big, James. 10 babies is a marketing goldmine. As the day wore on, the house was filled with laughter, bickering, and the kind of chaos only a close-knit family could bring. Despite the overwhelming situation, Jenna found herself smiling more often than not. Every time someone cracked a joke or offered a bizarre suggestion, she felt a little lighter. Her belly might have been heavy, but her heart was full. Later that evening, after most of the family had left and the house had quieted down, Marge and Cheryl stayed behind to help clean up. Marge stood by the sink, washing dishes, while Cheryl meticulously folded baby name suggestions into a neat stack. You know, Jenna, Marge said, her voice softer now. I was panicked when I first heard the news. 10 babies. It's unbelievable. But seeing how much love this family has for you, for those little ones, I know you're going to be just fine. We all will. Jenna smiled, leaning back into the couch. Thanks, Marge. It's overwhelming, but I feel lucky to have everyone rallying around us. Even if it's a bit much sometimes. A bit much is the Anderson family motto, Cheryl quipped, but her smile was genuine. As James joined Jenna on the couch, draping an arm around her shoulders, she let out a contented sigh. The road ahead was daunting. She knew that. There would be complications, sleepless nights, and moments of doubt. But there would also be laughter, love, and the kind of drama only a family like hers could provide. Together, they'd face whatever came next. And with 10 babies on the way, there would certainly never be a dull moment. The day Jenna went into labor felt like the world itself had stopped turning and turned its focus entirely on Memorial General Hospital. James had been pacing the living room when Jenna doubled over, clutching her belly. Her water broke with a dramatic gush that sent him into full panic mode. James, Jenna groaned, gripping the back of a chair for support. This isn't a drill. It's happening! It's happening! James shouted, scrambling for her hospital bag and throwing it over his shoulder as if it were a fireman's rescue mission. We practiced this. We're ready, I think. By the time they reached the hospital, the Anderson family phone tree was already buzzing. Within 30 minutes, the family began arriving in droves. Marge was first, bursting into the maternity ward with a giant thermos of coffee and a cooler packed with sandwiches. I brought provisions, she declared. This could take hours, and we need to keep our strength up. Uncle Leroy followed closely behind, dragging a suitcase with a portable speaker system. I've got music. We need the right vibe for welcoming 10 babies into the world. What vibe exactly? Cheryl asked, eyeing him skeptically. Celebratory, Leroy grinned. I've got everything from Sinatra to Beyoncé. By noon, the maternity waiting area looked more like a wedding reception. Balloons floated above clusters of family members huddled together, each holding coffee cups and swapping theories about who the babies would look like. Even the hospital staff couldn't resist smiling at the sight of the festive crowd. Nurses peeked out from behind desks, trying to count how many Andersons had shown up. Are all these people with you? One nurse asked James as he dashed to Jenna's side. He gave an apologetic laugh. You have no idea. Jenna, propped up in her hospital bed, smiled through the steady ebb of contractions. James, I think half the family is here. Is this even allowed? It's the Anderson way, he replied, squeezing her hand. Full throttle or nothing. The maternity ward buzzed with an energy unlike anything the staff had ever seen. Patients in nearby rooms craned their necks to see the commotion. A terminally ill man named Mr. Stevenson, who hadn't smiled in weeks, was overheard telling a nurse, "What's happening down the hall? It sounds like a party." The nurse grinned. "A woman's about to give birth to 10 babies. Her family's taking over the place." "Well, bring me closer," Mr. Stevenson said, chuckling. "I want to hear it." The Andersons, ever the social butterflies, welcomed everyone into their bubble of excitement. Cheryl started handing out cupcakes she'd brought, claiming, "We need to spread the joy." Soon, even patients hooked up to IVs were laughing and joking about whether Jenna's babies would break a Guinness World Record. When Marge overheard a nurse saying the hospital chapel had never been busier, she promptly gathered the family for a prayer circle. Even the skeptics among them bowed their heads as she led a heartfelt plea for safe deliveries and healthy babies. Hours passed, and the waiting room turned into a festival of sorts. Leroy's speaker played soft jazz as the kids in the family handed out handmade welcome baby cards to anyone who passed by. Tony was busy explaining his ultimate baby name ranking system to a very confused doctor. "Thor still ranks higher than glitter," Tony insisted. "It's science." Back in Jenna's room, the atmosphere was calmer but no less charged with emotion. Dr. Patel entered with a team of specialists. The birth of 10 babies was no small feat, and the room was prepared with stations for each newborn. Jenna's heart raced as the nurses explained the process. "Okay, Jenna," Dr. Patel said, her voice steady and reassuring. "We're going to deliver these babies via C-section. It's the safest option given the circumstances." James kissed Jenna's forehead. "You've got this," he whispered, though his own voice trembled. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Let's do this." As Jenna was wheeled into the operating room, James took a moment to address the family, who had gathered just outside the maternity ward. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "It's game time. Say a prayer, send good vibes, or whatever you do. Jenna's got this, and those babies are going to be amazing." Cheers erupted from the crowd, and even the hospital staff couldn't help but join in. The Andersons had turned the sterile hospital into a place of hope, joy, and celebration. In the operating room, the energy was electric. Nurses moved quickly, doctors communicated in low, precise tones, and James stood at Jenna's side, holding her hand as the first incision was made. Jenna winced but focused on James, who kept whispering, "You're incredible. I love you." And then it began. "Baby number 1, Dr. Patel announced, holding up a tiny, wriggling newborn. The room erupted in applause, and Jenna let out a shaky laugh. One by one, the babies were delivered, each met with cheers from the staff. Baby 2 arrived with a loud wail, Baby 3 came out calm and quiet, and by the time Baby 7 made their entrance, even the most stoic nurse had tears in her eyes. When the 10th baby arrived, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Patel gently placed the final baby in the waiting incubator, her face lighting up with a triumphant smile. "All 10 babies are here," she said, her voice full of emotion, "and they're perfect." James broke down, tears streaming down his face as he kissed Jenna's hand. "You did it," he whispered. "You really did it." Jenna, exhausted but overjoyed, managed a weak smile. "We did it." Outside, when James stepped into the waiting room to deliver the news, the reaction was immediate. Cheers, tears, and laughter filled the space as family members hugged, cried, and even danced. Leroy's speaker blasted Beyoncé's Halo, and for a moment, it felt like the whole hospital was celebrating. The Anderson family's joy was infectious. Even the grumpiest patients smiled, and the nurses later joked that Jenna's delivery had brought more happiness to the ward than they'd seen in years. Jenna lay in her hospital bed later, surrounded by her tiny, fragile miracles. Each baby was carefully swaddled and placed in an incubator, their tiny hands waving in the air. James sat beside her, staring in awe at the 10 little faces. "They're beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Jenna nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They're perfect." And outside the room, the Anderson family waited eagerly for their chance to meet the newest members of their ever-expanding clan, ready to welcome them into a world bursting with love, laughter, and a little bit of chaos. Bringing 10 newborns home was like preparing for an expedition to uncharted territory. The hospital had kept Jenna and the babies for several weeks to monitor their health, ensuring every tiny heart was beating strong and every delicate lung was functioning well. When the day came for discharge, the Anderson family mobilized like an army, each member assigned a task. Marge was in charge of organizing the baby car seats. Cheryl had appointed herself wardrobe coordinator, meticulously packing tiny matching outfits, and Uncle Leroy showed up with a camera crew he had hired himself to capture the moment for posterity. "Leroy, there's no way we're going on TV," James muttered, but his protests fell on deaf ears as Leroy adjusted the angle of his tripod. The hospital staff lined up to say their goodbyes as Jenna and James prepared to leave with their 10 little miracles. Even the most stoic doctor in the NICU, who hadn't smiled once during the baby's stay, broke into a grin as James and Marge carefully loaded the last car seat into the caravan of minivans they had borrowed to get everyone home. "Good luck," a nurse called out, waving as the Anderson convoy drove away. "And call us if you need anything, literally anything." When they arrived at the house, chaos erupted almost immediately. The front yard was decorated with banners and balloons. "Welcome home, Anderson 10," was scrawled across a massive sign that spanned the porch, courtesy of Tony, who had also installed what he called a baby-friendly fireworks system. "Tony, no fireworks," Marge scolded, swatting at him. "The babies just got home. You'll scare them half to death." "They're babies, Mom, not pigeons," Tony retorted, but one withering glare from Marge was enough to send him sulking back to the garage. Inside, the house was an explosion of baby supplies. 10 cribs were neatly lined up in the converted living room turned nursery, each with a color-coded blanket and name tag. There were boxes of diapers stacked to the ceiling, thanks to a well-timed donation from a diaper company Leroy had somehow roped into sponsorship. "I told you I'd handle the business side," Leroy said, patting James on the back as if he'd just brokered a multi-million-dollar deal. "Leroy," James sighed, "you're unbelievable." As the babies were carefully carried inside, the older kids in the family swarmed around them, oohing and awing. Gracie, still holding out hope for her naming rights, cooed at one of the babies. "This one looks like a Sparkle. Can we call her Sparkle?" "Gracie," Ethan groaned, rolling his eyes. "We've talked about this." "Hey," James interjected, clapping his hands for attention. "Let's get the babies settled before we start the naming debate, okay?" Jenna, watching from the couch, couldn't help but laugh. Despite the overwhelming noise, the exhaustion in her bones, and the sheer chaos unfolding around her, she felt a deep, unshakable sense of joy. This was her family, wild, loud, and utterly devoted. Marge soon took charge, corralling everyone into their roles. Cheryl fussed over the placement of the cribs, insisting they align perfectly. Tony was relegated to assembling the new bottle warmer, though his enthusiasm waned the moment he realized it required reading the manual. Leroy had taken up the mantle of head photographer, documenting every moment with dramatic flair. "Jenna, tilt your head slightly," he instructed, snapping a picture as she cradled two of the babies. "Perfect. You look radiant. Absolutely radiant." "I look exhausted," Jenna corrected, but she smiled anyway. That evening, as the house finally quieted down, Jenna and James sat in the nursery, surrounded by their sleeping babies. It was the first time they'd been alone with them since the hospital. The faint glow of the nightlight cast soft shadows on the walls, and the only sound was the gentle rhythm of 10 tiny breaths. "Can you believe this?" James whispered, his voice filled with awe as he gazed at the cribs. 10 babies, all ours." Jenna leaned her head against his shoulder. "It's surreal. I keep waiting to wake up." He kissed her temple. "You're amazing, you know that? I don't know how you're doing this." "I'm not doing it alone," she murmured. "We've got an army, remember?" He chuckled, but his voice turned serious. "It's going to be hard, though. There'll be sleepless nights, financial worries, and a lot of diapers." "A lot," Jenna agreed, laughing softly. "But we'll figure it out, one day at a time." As if on cue, a faint cry broke the quiet. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the peaceful nursery became a chorus of wails. Jenna and James exchanged a wide-eyed look before bursting into laughter. "Well," James said, standing and rolling up his sleeves, Day 1 starts now. By the end of the week, the Anderson household had found its rhythm, or something resembling it. Family members came in shifts, helping with feedings, laundry, and the endless stream of diaper changes. Cheryl had officially dubbed herself baby stylist and was often found parading the babies around in miniature outfits she'd ordered online. Even the neighbors got involved. Mrs. Carmichael from next door showed up with casseroles and offered to babysit whenever you need a break. The mailman, who had delivered an unprecedented number of baby gifts, started referring to the Andersons as the legends. Every day brought a new adventure: spilled bottles, synchronized crying fits, and, occasionally, the magical quiet moments when all 10 babies slept at once. Jenna and James quickly learned to savor those moments, collapsing on the couch together and marveling at how much their lives had changed. But through the sleepless nights and the overwhelming to-do lists, one thing remained constant: the love that filled their home. It wasn't just love for the babies, but for the family that rallied around them, proving time and again that the Anderson clan could tackle anything, especially with 10 pairs of tiny hands leading the way. Naming day in the Anderson household was nothing short of a national event. Jenna had joked that they might need a referee to settle the arguments over the names, but as the family gathered in their home, every available chair, couch cushion, and even part of the floor occupied, it became clear she wasn't far from the truth. Marge had brought a whiteboard to display approved names, and Cheryl had printed out lists of trendy baby names from various websites. Tony came armed with his infamous ultimate baby name ranking system, a color-coded spreadsheet that no one wanted to see. Even Leroy had brought a printed certificate that declared himself the official baby name consultant. "All right," Jenna said, cradling one of the babies in her arms as she glanced at James. "How are we doing this? We've got 10 little people to name." James clapped his hands for attention, silencing the room, though a few murmurs persisted in the back. "Here's the deal. Jenna and I have been thinking, and we'll name some of them based on family suggestions. But," he raised a finger before the crowd erupted into cheers, "final say is ours? Got it?" The crowd murmured in reluctant agreement. Cheryl immediately started waving her printed list, and Tony opened his laptop, preparing for battle. Jenna smiled, adjusting the baby in her arms. "Okay, let's start with this one," she said, looking down at the little girl she'd been calling Baby A. "She's going to be Sparkle." A cheer erupted from the kids in the family, especially Gracie, who leapt from her seat. "I knew it! Sparkle's the best name. She's going to be my favorite cousin." Ethan rolled his eyes. "She's one of 10, Gracie. You can't have a favorite." Gracie stuck out her tongue but resumed her seat, beaming with pride. The naming continued with the same mix of excitement, tears, and spirited debates that were quintessentially Anderson. Baby B, the calmest of the bunch, was named Benjamin after James's grandfather, a decision that earned an emotional "about time" from Marge. Baby C, whose hearty cry had made her the loudest in the nursery, was dubbed Victoria, a name Cheryl claimed had queenly vibes. Baby D was named Theo, short for Theodore, after Jenna's late father, a decision that brought tears to her eyes and earned her a hug from James. "He'd be so proud," James whispered. Baby E became Isaac, a name that Tony argued was scientifically the coolest, though his explanation was cut short by Cheryl tossing a pillow at him. Baby F was Emma, a name that had been on Jenna's personal list for years, while Baby G was Daniel, chosen by James in honor of his best friend from childhood. When they got to Baby H, Leroy cleared his throat dramatically. "If I may," he began, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, "I propose we name this one Leonardo. Strong, artistic, rolls off the tongue. Also, it'd make me look cool." "Leonardo it is," Jenna said with a laugh, earning a victorious fist pump from Leroy. Baby I was named Sophia, another name Jenna had always loved, and Baby J, the smallest and quietest of the 10, became Grace, chosen by James after the incredible strength he'd seen in Jenna throughout the pregnancy. By the end of the evening, the whiteboard was filled with names, and the room buzzed with energy. Sparkle, Benjamin, Victoria, Theo, Isaac, Emma, Daniel, Leonardo, Sophia, and Grace. Each name was carefully written under its corresponding baby's crib, and family members took turns holding and cooing over the newly christened Anderson 10. As the night wound down, the family gathered for a final toast, courtesy of Marge, who raised her glass of sparkling cider high. "To the Anderson 10, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "May they always know how loved they are and how much joy they've brought to all of us." The room echoed with cheers, laughter, and clinking glasses. Jenna, exhausted but glowing with happiness, leaned her head against James's shoulder as they watched their family celebrate. "They'll never have a quiet moment," she murmured, half laughing. James smiled, kissing her forehead. "And they'll never feel alone. Not with this bunch." As the family began to trickle out, Jenna and James sat quietly, gazing at their sleeping babies. Sparkle, wrapped in a blanket Gracie had insisted on picking out, was nestled closest to Jenna. "Welcome to the family, little ones," Jenna whispered. "You're in for a wild, wonderful ride." And with that, the Anderson household settled into a peaceful silence, for the moment. 3 years later, the Anderson household had evolved into a delightful blend of chaos, love, and routines that barely kept things in order. The once quiet suburban house was now a bustling hub of toddler energy. The Anderson 10, Sparkle, Benjamin, Victoria, Theo, Isaac, Emma, Daniel, Leonardo, Sophia, and Grace were no longer the fragile newborns that had turned the maternity ward into a celebration. They were now a whirlwind of giggles, tantrums, and boundless curiosity. Jenna stood in the middle of the living room, her hands on her hips, surveying the aftermath of breakfast. Pancakes were smeared on the table, a sippy cup dangled precariously from the edge, and Sparkle was attempting to feed a stuffed animal with what looked suspiciously like syrup-covered hands. "Sparkle, honey, no syrup on Mr. Bear, please," Jenna said, gently prying the sticky toy away. "But he's hungry," Sparkle protested, her bottom lip quivering. "Mr. Bear can wait until lunch," Jenna replied, wiping Sparkle's hands with a damp cloth. "Now go help your brothers and sisters get their shoes on." Sparkle huffed, but toddled off, her golden curls bouncing as she joined the fray near the front door, where Theo and Benjamin were attempting to put their shoes on the wrong feet. Nearby, Victoria and Sophia were in the middle of what seemed to be an intense debate about whose dinosaur toy was bigger. James entered the room, holding a laundry basket overflowing with tiny clothes. He looked at Jenna with mock defeat. "Laundry's multiplying faster than the kids." Jenna laughed, tossing him a kiss as she plopped onto the couch for a brief moment of rest. "It's not laundry, it's a science experiment. I'm pretty sure we're breeding socks in there." James chuckled and set the basket down. "We've got 10 minutes before Marge and Tony show up to help with the park outing. Think we can corral them by then?" "Let's aim for 20, Jenna said with a grin, "and pray." Sure enough, 10 minutes later, Marge arrived, bustling in with bags of snacks and a determined expression. "All right, troops," she called out, clapping her hands. "Let's move out. We've got swings waiting for us." Tony followed, carrying a wagon he'd customized to fit all 10 kids. "Behold," he announced, gesturing to the wagon like a game show host. "The Anderson Express, patent pending." The kids were thrilled. Sparkle climbed into the wagon first, declaring herself captain, while Daniel and Isaac argued over who got to sit in the engine seat. Eventually, with much negotiation and only one minor tantrum, all 10 were seated, snacks in hand, and the group headed to the park. At the park, the Anderson 10 scattered like wind-blown leaves, each finding their own adventure. Sparkle led a pretend pirate ship on the jungle gym. Benjamin and Theo raced each other down the slides, and Grace quietly collected flowers by the fence, her tiny bouquet growing with each step. Jenna watched from a bench, her heart swelling as she saw how much they had grown. James sat beside her, his arms slung around her shoulders. "Can you believe this is our life?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "It's chaotic and exhausting," Jenna said with a laugh, leaning into him. "But it's also perfect." Just then, Marge approached, holding Sophia and Victoria's hands. "You've got some tough negotiators here," she said with a smile. "They tried to convince me to buy them an ice cream truck." "That sounds about right," Jenna replied. What did you say? Marge grinned. I told them to ask their father. Thanks, Mom, James said, shaking his head. Really appreciate that. As the day wore on, the kids wore themselves out. By the time the Anderson crew returned home, the toddlers were yawning and rubbing their eyes. Sparkle had fallen asleep in the wagon, her stuffed bear tucked under one arm. One by one, Jenna and James carried them inside, placing them on their tiny beds in the nursery. Once the house was quiet again, Jenna and James collapsed onto the couch, their exhaustion mixed with deep contentment. James rested his head against Jenna's shoulder. 3 years in, and we're still standing. Barely, Jenna teased, but her smile was soft. But we're standing together. James looked at her, his eyes warm. Here's to the next 3 years. And the 3 after that, Jenna replied, resting her hand in his. In the quiet glow of the living room, the Anderson house, for all its chaos, felt like the most peaceful place on earth. Together, they had built something extraordinary, a family bursting with love, laughter, and just enough mayhem to keep life interesting. Years passed, and the Anderson 10 grew into a lively, tightly knit group of siblings, each with their unique personality and bond. The once chaotic household found its rhythm, a beautiful symphony of love and resilience that resonated far beyond their home. Sparkle, always the leader, became the ringleader of countless adventures, her imagination a constant source of wonder. Benjamin, ever the thoughtful protector, watched over his siblings with quiet strength. Victoria and Sophia, inseparable in their mischief and dreams, lit up every room they entered with their laughter. Jenna often found herself marveling at how quickly time seemed to pass. It felt like just yesterday she was cradling them all in the hospital, overwhelmed by the weight of her responsibility, but buoyed by the love surrounding her. Now, the Anderson 10 were thriving, and her heart swelled with pride every time she saw them together, their bond unbreakable. On their 10th birthday, the Anderson family threw a celebration that could only be described as epic. The backyard was transformed into a carnival, complete with games, balloons, and a towering cake that barely fit through the back door. Family members and neighbors gathered, each taking a moment to marvel at the incredible journey the Andersons had been on. Marge stood at the center of the crowd, holding a microphone she had undoubtedly wrestled from Leroy, who was busy documenting the event with his ever-present camera. I'd like to say a few words, Marge announced, silencing the chatter. 10 years ago, we welcomed 10 little miracles into the world. We had no idea what was ahead of us. Diapers, chaos, sleepless nights. But we knew one thing. We were in it together. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Jenna wiped a tear from her cheek as she looked at James, who was holding Grace in his arms. She's right, Jenna whispered. We really have done this together. James smiled, his eyes soft with emotion. And look at them now, he said, nodding toward their children, who were gathered in a circle, laughing and playing. They're our greatest adventure. As the party wound down, the Anderson 10 sat together at the edge of the yard, watching the sky turn shades of gold and pink. Sparkle, ever the dreamer, leaned back on her hands and looked at her siblings. You know what's cool? She said, her voice carrying in the quiet. What? Theo asked, tilting his head. We started as 10 tiny babies, and now we're 10 best friends, Sparkle replied, her eyes twinkling. No one else has what we have. Benjamin nodded. Yeah, we've got each other. Always. From the porch, Jenna and James watched their children, their hearts full. They're going to be okay, Jenna said softly, leaning into James. They're going to be more than okay, James replied, wrapping his arm around her. They're going to be amazing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its final warm light over the Anderson household, the family gathered together, 10 children surrounded by the love and laughter of their parents and extended family. The Andersons weren't just a family. They were a testament to the power of unity, perseverance, and unconditional love. And as the first stars appeared in the night sky, Jenna smiled, knowing their story was far from over. It was just the beginning of a legacy that would shine brightly for generations to come.